Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 12 of the High School Golf Podcast. Today, we are going to have an in-depth discussion about the parent dynamic in high school golf and just have an open conversation to coaches and parents, how we can all work together to help our athletes improve and reach their goals and just have a successful high school career. I have Ted Bishop. I'm Crystal Morse. Ted, why don't you tell everybody kind of where our speaking engagement? It's exciting coming up.
Looking forward to January the 22nd, 1:15 at the PGA Show. You and I will be part of the National High School Golf Coaches Symposium that they're having there. And certainly looking forward to that.
So we'll do another podcast kind of highlighting what we're going to talk about. If you still want to sign up for that conference, I do know that they have a virtual session too. So if you want to hop in virtually, listen to all the speakers there, and just get some good information leading into the season, you can always do that as well. Today's purpose, Ted, we're basically going to share our experiences. We're both parents of high school athletes and coaches. So we're going to share that experience and that expertise with everybody that's listening. So it should be some good information. Just to give everybody a little bit of history. So I coach quite a few youth at the moment that are basically from ages 4 to college age kids. So here at the Legends, we have a pretty extensive PGA Junior League, really the largest PGA Junior League in the state of Indiana. I run girls golf and first tee clinics. So really we're involved with kids of all ages. And so there's a lot of things that we see even prior to the high school experience that can really help these kids have a better playing experience. So the first tip that I'm going to dive into for parents is going to be the fact that I'd love to see you give your players more freedom. And this comes from witnessing a lot of parents being over-involved with their player on the actual practice and playing fields. One thing that I see more than anything is just parents that are not letting their kids make mistakes during practice. They are over-coaching the technical aspects. So just to give you an example, if maybe the player is not hitting the ball perfectly, the parent's intuition is to provide instruction on every single swing, to say, oh, well, you did this wrong, this swing, this wrong, this swing. Let's try this. So in every aspect of that swing, the player is being told to do something. And I think this really limits their ability to think on their own. And then fast forward to high school, when you get these same players in high school, the players are not able to think on their own when they're out on the golf course. So they don't have that confidence in their own ability to make decisions out on the golf course when we're playing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we're covering a lot of ground here and hitting on a lot of different areas, but I guess what I want to do is I'm going to talk to parents, first of all, on how to be a good spectator. And I always feel like being out of sight, out of mind is a really positive thing for parents. I know when we coach our players, we talk about spending a lot of time thinking about your swing and the mechanical and technical issue of all that when you're on the range tee or during practice during the week. But when you go to the tee and you're actually competing, then you need to trust the work that you have put in. And I grew up as a basketball player, I guess primarily a baseball player in my youth sport days. And I was always trained at an early age that one thing I never did was look into the crowd and look at my dad. If I made a mistake or, something bad happened, struck out in a baseball game. Same thing was true in high school basketball. If I turned the ball over, I never wanted to look directly at the coach and get his reaction, because I don't think any of those things, really helped me perform. And it kind of tipped things off, I guess, as to really maybe where my mind was at. And it was more concerned about making a mistake and getting approval from someone else, whether it was a parent or a coach. And I think that that's a fundamental topic here in youth sports. Kids, they want approval. And from whomever it might be that's impactful on the sport they're playing and their performance. So what I would say to parents back to that being out of sight, out of mind. I know some of the freshman parents that we have that come in, one of the things that I'll tell them as a coach is don't stand directly behind the green. Don't be in the line of sight if your player is hitting a shot into the green. Sometimes they'll see you back there behind the green and they'll all of a sudden focus more on you and the need to hit a good shot than they are whatever the target is that they're trying to execute to. That would be the first thing that I would say. And look, hey, we all know parents are going to be involved in, particularly in junior golf, as that player's getting ready for competition, whether it's a lesson they're taking from a professional, whether it's a parent who is self-teaching, their own player, which I really wouldn't recommend, and we'll get into that later. So I would try to get all that stuff done prior to the competition so that when the player goes out there, they can just play golf and not be so caught up in all these other things.
Just kind of a guide, and I know it's hard to watch for parents, and myself, I have a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, and I've watched them come up through golf. They've been on all my programs through the years, and don't get me wrong, parents, it can be hard to watch your player make mistakes. So whether it's in practice or in competition, but if you're out there on the practice tee with them and you are just kind of watching them hit and you see them making mistakes, I would encourage you to just step back and let them work through kind of what they're working through, whether it's putting, chipping, maybe they're out there playing a practice round and you just watched them three putt. Just refrain from commenting on every swing they're making. That would be probably my biggest advice, because I will tell you a lot of times I've seen the enjoyment of the kids. I can see on their face how much they are not enjoying the experience if they're being corrected on every single swing. And so really what we're trying to do here in golf, the more that you can give your child freedom to make those mistakes and learn a little bit more on their own, they're going to find more enjoyment in the game. And if you can truly let your kid find enjoyment in the game of golf, whether it's just they're enjoying the sport for what it is and not for, the thought of a college scholarship or not for the thought of, winning the state finals or whatever it may be, but just for the true enjoyment of the game, they're going to just enjoy the sport and probably play a lot better and succeed a lot more.
Yeah, I just think the most important role that a parent can have is giving their player positive reinforcement. And that always, I get back to a story that Dr. Bob Winters has told at several of the seminars that we've had here, where he was actually having a conference with a parent, a dad, and a daughter, a client that he was working with. And to get the daughter to open up a little bit, he asked the father to leave the room. And, when he got into a deep discussion with the daughter, she told Dr. Bob that the hardest 18 holes that she played were the 18 holes she had to replay in the car with her dad on the way home after the round. And I think as parents, we've all been guilty of that. I had two daughters that played at a high level, and I know even with you and your kids, I'm sure if you're being totally honest, there's been times when Carson has played in a tournament and you replayed the whole round with him as soon as you possibly could, and I just don't think that's a positive experience for the player, and they know they didn't play well, and they may not want to talk about it immediately after the round, but it's a hard game. Golf is probably the hardest sport that kids are going to play at a young age, and there's just no way a parent can give their player enough positive reinforcement.
Kind of going forward from that, one of the big things that I want to talk about is communication. Now, this is going to cover a lot of different areas, because there's communication with the parents and the players, there's communication with the parents and the coaches. The main thing for communication when it's between parents and players, as a coach, I would like to see the player have more of a voice. I would encourage you to let your player speak, let them find their voice. And for example, a parent and a player standing side by side, and I ask the player a question, and the parent speaks and responds for the player. And what I would encourage you to do is just to let your player respond to the coach. And even if we're talking about the high school level, encourage your player to be able to approach the coaches. So if your player has something they want to talk about. Maybe they want to talk about improving. Maybe they want to talk about how they can get better, how they can get in the lineup. If your player comes to you like, Mom and Dad, I'm frustrated with X, Y, and Z, my response to them would be like, okay, if this is something that is really important to you, you need to reach out to your coach and you need to set up a time to talk to them because that's basically just going to help them grow through this process.
In our coaching platform, we have lines of communication, and the first line of communication is always between the player and the coach. And some players find that to be a difficult situation to go in and to talk to coaches. And so I think it's got to be the job of the coach somehow to make your players feel comfortable with you as a person, to develop some trust so that the player feels good about the coaches being approachable. I would say that that's a lot easier said than done. I think a fundamental impediment that younger people have in this day and age is really a lack of verbal communication skills. And I think it really revolves around the fact that everybody's got a mobile device and it's so much easier to text than it is to look someone in the eye and actually have a conversation. So what I would say to coaches is that is a fundamental responsibility that you have to your players, is to help them somehow develop better verbal communication skills. And the only way that you can really be successful in doing that is you have to treat every player differently. Their personalities are different, their backgrounds are different, their parental influence is different. So you really have to become a psychologist yourself and understand how you can get players to come in and open up. And I think that you would agree with this, that the most successful players that we have had play for us as coaches were players who were very open with us, who we could have a really relaxed and in-depth conversation with. And the players that have struggled from a performance standpoint are players that really find that to be difficult.
I would agree. And I think that's kind of even thinking further, a real life lesson that players can learn from high school golf. And it doesn't just start in high school. Like, this is something that you can start in, middle school or early on, like elementary school, just getting your player comfortable talking to an adult figure and a coach is going to be really important.
I doubt that there's two coaches in the country, and I would take this at almost any level, professional and collegiate, that talk to each other about coaching more than you and I do. And I know one of the frustrations that we have as coaches and golf professionals, particularly this time of the year when we're actually working with players on swing changes or technical improvements to their game, is getting player feedback. And so it's just like the cornerstone, I think, of really trying to get an athlete to perform at their maximum potential is first and foremost being able to communicate honestly and openly with their coach or teacher.
And here's another point that's we are super challenging for us right now. In the high school level, I mean, there are restrictions to how you can communicate with players. So we have the whole Safe Sport Act. Coaches really need to be careful on how they communicate, whether it's one-on-one. So we're all aware of that. So honestly, through this school, and I totally understand this, they frown upon text messaging. And I totally understand that on a couple different forums. I don't understand it on the levels just because that's kind of where our culture is right now. So the players and the parents have to understand, even though it may be more comfortable for the player to send a text, we really have to watch ourselves as coaches just from a legality standpoint in the Safe Sport Act on how we communicate with players. Honestly, the face-to-face interaction or a phone call is really where we're at right now.
Just the last thing I would say to that is I think, again, as a coach, you have to be very cautious on the platform in which that face-to-face conversation takes place. You have to protect yourself. You and I are lucky in the fact we have each other as co-head coaches. So if we go into an individual player meeting, there's two of us. And, when we talk to college coaches, which we do a lot to try to get input from them on what are the best ways to communicate with our players, they really have tried to steer us away from some of these one-on-one player meetings. And if you're a coach that doesn't have an assistant, or you're not in a position where you feel like you can have a one-on-one meeting in the proper forum, that's why you have an athletic director. Then go and sit with your athletic director and have this player meeting so that you've got, somebody who's a direct supervisor of yours involved in what's going on. And we've had some very productive parent player meetings with our athletic director. And these were not meetings that were set up because we necessarily were having a problem with parents or players, but it was a really good environment to conduct that meeting. So there's a lot of different ways to do these things, and every coach knows their situation better than we do. But there's no substitute for verbal communication.
Kind of going along that topic too, and just something that I've had experience with through my youth programming, which includes, hundreds of kids a year. There are a lot more kids that struggle with, I'm going to say ADHD and anxiety, just in our youth culture today. It's a challenge, it's a struggle, and it's something that coaches have to deal with. Now, one thing that is frustrating as a PGA professional and a coach is when you get a player and the parent is not open about maybe that player's struggles. So, and this is kind of in that middle school realm. If I have a player come to my PGA Junior League and, we've been meeting for a few weeks and I see that player really struggling with the group setting, or they look like they're not having a good time. And then the parent finally divulges to me that this player really struggles with anxiety and ADHD and that they don't do well with big crowds. Okay, that would have been nice to know way prior to running this program. We set up a game plan going forward for him to succeed. I'm going to take this to high school golf. If you know that your player struggles with whether it's emotional anxiety, whether it's issues focusing, whatever it may be, you really need to be open to your coaches about that and develop together ways for that player to succeed. And I just think you're not helping the coach or the player if you're not being open about that. The truth of it is, as a parent, you're with your child 365, 24/7. You know them. As a coach, we're with them maybe 6 to 8 weeks out of the year for 2 hours a day, or at least a little more on tournament days. So it's not really fair to the coach to expect them to know how to kind of coach that player because you're with them all the time. And so I think that that is probably one of the frustrations that I've just had over the years. And I just find it so much better for the player if the parent can really be open about maybe some of their players' struggles.
Yeah, the last thing that I would have to say here is that I think you need to encourage your players and your kids to use golf as a mental release. And if a kid has a bad day at school and they're going to go to golf practice, then they need to really understand that 2 hours of golf practice can be a way for them to forget what happened at school and to leave that baggage behind them when they do get in that practice forum. And I would also maintain, just as an adult who's played golf many times, as an escape from what was happening in my daily life, that a lot of times the time that you do spend with that release, all of a sudden, when the practice or the round of golf is over with, whatever happened that day doesn't really quite seem to be as bad as it was at the time. But as coaches, we've all dealt with players in practice who showed up at practice or even competition and they'd had a rough day for whatever the reason might be, and it affected how they played. So I would really encourage you to look for these signs. And again, just these are things that you really have to kind of do at the beginning of the season, and you've got to train your players how to think. It's not just something that you can spit out to them in a sentence or two, and they're going to say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to turn it off, coach," and go play. You've got to train these skills.
And I do think there's a definite difference between competitive golf and recreational golf. If I were to be honest, long term, coaches and parents want players to be able to enjoy golf long term. I mean, I would think as a parent, I know you want to see your child be able to use golf throughout their life, like whether it's in the workforce or with their families, in the future. So that is going to be the number one goal. Be like, I want you to enjoy this game. and whatever that may be and whatever it's going to bring into your life. Kind of going back to this anxiety issue, you need to be honest with yourself. If you have a player that struggles with competitive golf so much that they can't overcome that. Maybe it brings a lot of anxiety to their life and it just puts them in a bad headspace. It's okay if that player is just a recreational golfer. Don't make it all or nothing for them. Like, it doesn't have to be you either play competitive and in high school golf or you're not playing golf at all. For some youth players, it is okay if golf is just a recreational sport and that they may not find competition to be something that, that they enjoy doing. And I think as a parent, you got to be honest with yourself about, where your child may fit in there and try not to force it. Just speaking from experience, you're going to get to a point, and this kind of comes from our previous point of not being too over involved, but I would just really encourage you to have your player what we call own their own game. And so when we talk about a player owning their own game, it means being able to make their own decisions and being able to control maybe their own practice time as they get older. You need to go practice on your own. You need to go out and play 9 or 18 holes on your own so that you can develop those decision-making skills, everything that the golf kind of forces you to do, dealing with adversity. Let your player do that on their own. And I think there is a time, obviously, when they're young that you are going to be involved, but as they get older, it's going to be time to kind of release the reins. Maybe you don't sit in on their lessons. Maybe you just talk to the PGA professional after the lesson and you guys all talk about it together and kind of summarize and let the player process that information. Ted, I know with your daughters, how did you handle instruction and kind of letting your daughters own their own game?
Oh, I always had another PGA professional teach them. I felt like that was important. I would periodically go watch the lessons so that in between lessons for them with their PGA professional, we were on the same page. We were one voice, and that worked out well for me.
Yeah, sometimes that can be tough to do, but again, I think it's just going to help the player have that freedom. They're going to own their game and they're going to take on more responsibility with their game. So it's not just coming from their parent. Kind of wrapping up, hopefully, parents, you could get a few tips about kind of how to handle your junior golfer. Kind of our advice from coach to coach. I know, Ted, one thing that we started this past year in 2025 is we came up with a parent player contract. And basically, in that parent player contract, it just listed all of our expectations and guidelines that we asked our parents and players to follow. They had to read that agreement during our parent player meeting and both sign off on it. I think that can be an important thing if, as a coach, if you haven't done that and laid out those expectations, that could definitely be an important thing that you can incorporate this season for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. And we always give you our contact information at the end of these podcasts. And if you, in fact, do want to see our actual player parent agreement, we'll be happy to send it to you.
I know we had that conversation yesterday about just our different ways of learning and communicating. Ted, you mentioned yesterday you like to call other people, like you like to use your resources, pick up the phone and talk to people, maybe about some coaching stuff, get feedback. Hey, how did you handle this situation? You read a lot of books, and I enjoy listening to the podcast. So we definitely kind of have a different way of expanding maybe our coaching knowledge or kind of learning about different ways of coaching. But what are some things you find to be beneficial?
Well, I've just been very fortunate, Crystal, in my career to be exposed to a lot of very high profile coaches in different sports at all different levels. And I've never been afraid to pick up the phone and give them a call and kind of share what my experiences are with whatever they may have dealt with. And I enjoy those conversations. And I usually find that when I call another coach, they're very open and very receptive to talking coach to coach, trying to help each other out. And so that has been very productive. And I mean, I've called football coaches, basketball coaches, baseball managers, whatever the situation may be. But I've talked to certainly in our school system, I'll talk to other coaches in other sports with this group of athletes that we coach to find out if in fact they're experiencing some of the same things that we do with our golfers. never afraid to talk to a coach in another sport who's coaching one of the athletes that we are. I mean, that sometimes could be some of those valuable input that you get. But as you mentioned, I do like to read books. One of the best books that I ever read was written by Joe Torre, the former Yankees manager, and it was called Ground Rules for Winners. He talked about his involvement with the personalities on those great Yankee teams that he managed back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and he really did a nice job of equating it almost to a business management style. And I'm reading a book right now that my youngest daughter got me for Christmas that Dan Hurley wrote called Never Stop. And it's obviously Dan Hurley's a very successful collegiate basketball coach at UConn, and his methods would be not necessarily identical to mine, but I'm intrigued by the way that he has handled some things throughout his career. And then a guy that I've got a tremendous amount of respect for that I could listen to all day long, and his pearls of wisdom pop up on Twitter all the time, is Nick Saban. And Nick Saban is very direct, very forthright, and I think that his success speaks for itself at the college football level. And all of us have avenues for information like this that resonates with each of us personally. We're all different people. Find your platform and never be afraid to listen to other people.
Some of the podcasts that I enjoy listening to, the one golf-specific one is called The Golf Sit Down. It was developed by the founders of Op36, which is a big youth development program. So it's PGA professionals basically sharing their coaching experiences. They talk to other PGA professionals, but they also, through their podcasts, kind of speak to the parents. And I think it's beneficial for both coaches and parents to get that perspective. So they have some good ones. Also, the Winning Youth Coaching podcast is a good one. That's not just golf specific. I was just listening to one the other day that had Dr. Rob Bell. He was that local sports psychologist that we've talked to and that we know and use quite a bit. He was on there doing a podcast about mental toughness. So I just think getting that perspective from coaches from other sports and listening to other PGA professionals and coaches on how they coach players and maybe the ups and downs of it and always those tips for parents. So hopefully you guys got some tidbits. But yeah, listen to podcasts, read some books. Parents, really just encourage you again to, give your player that freedom to find their love of the game. Don't overcoach. Communicate with the coaches to help your player have the best experience in high school golf, and just encourage them to own their own game as they kind of start getting older. Ted, do you have any closing words?
The only thing that you just kind of triggered a thought there in some of those things that you said. I also, over the years, have talked to a lot of players, golfers at a pretty high level. And I got to be honest with you, Crystal, I get more out of talking to a player who certainly has had success, but who had to fail several times before they reached the success. I'd compare like Tom Watson with Tiger Woods. Early in his career, Tom Watson was really known as a choker because he couldn't win major championships. Obviously, at the end of the day, he won 8 major championships. Tiger's won 17. So probably failed less than what a guy like Watson has failed. And I can glean more information out of those that had to really kind of battle their way back rather than it just, proven winners time and time again. Because for us as high school coaches, those are the people that we're coaching. We're coaching the players that have got to bounce back. And I always love you reference Rob Bell, and his greatest saying as a sports psychologist is it's not about the setback, it's about the comeback.
We're all in this together. We enjoyed this discussion. Coaches, parents, feel free to reach out to us with any feedback, anything you want us to talk about. And again, look forward to the PGA Annual High School Golf Coaches Conference. You can join that virtually. Otherwise, I know they'll be sharing that out afterwards, and then we'll do a podcast with the information that we talked about. But we're really looking forward to that. Reach me by emailing me at crystal, that's CRYSTAL, @thelegendsgolfclub.com.
And mine is Ted Bishop, 38, PGA @AOL.com.
Thanks for listening to episode 12 of the High School Golf Podcast.